I still remember the weight of the air in that apartment, thick, humid, and strangely metallic, the way it feels before a thunderstorm breaks. It was only 2 weeks after the secret wedding, and I had driven across town in my ivory Lincoln, the one Mark always teased me about for being too old-fashioned to see them. I had baked lemon shortbread, his childhood favorite, and placed them carefully inside a tin lined with parchment, as I used to when he was little, when I tucked cookies into his school backpack. Their apartment, which I paid $2,200 a month for, looked unusually bright when I stepped inside. Sunlight bounced off the white marble countertops I had contributed to last Christmas. Another Forder's $800 spent because Jessica said the old laminate was depressing. I walked in slowly, my heels clicking softly, carrying the tin like a peace offering. The faint scent of vanilla candles drifted in the air. Their laughter floated from the living room, light, carefree, and painfully intimate. Jessica and Mark were curled up on the oversized sectional sofa. I recognized it instantly. I had paid $1,475 for that sofa the previous summer, because the two of them said the springs in their old one hurt their backs. Jessica's hair was swept up in a messy bun, her legs tucked neatly underneath her, and Mark was leaning so close their shoulders touched. The two of them were scrolling through something on an iPad, giggling like college sweethearts. I smiled, or tried to. "Hello. You too," I said softly as I set the tin down on the coffee table. My voice sounded warm, but my heart was beating strangely, fast, fluttery, like a bird stuck inside a cage. Jessica didn't look up. She just flicked her wrist, tapping the screen. "Oh my gosh, Mark. Look at this one. Your face! You look like you're about to faint." He laughed. "That was before I saw you walk down the aisle." The words hit me like a stiff slap. Before I saw you walk down the aisle. Hearing my son talk about a moment I never witnessed, a moment they had stolen from me, made something tighten around my lungs. I moved closer, trying to sound casual even as my palms felt cold and slightly damp. I murmured, "Here those the wedding proofs. May I see just one? I'd love to see you in your tuxedo, sweetheart." The room changed. The warmth went out like someone flipped a switch. Jessica snatched the iPad to her chest, so quickly that the screen made a slight crackling sound against her sweater. She turned her head slowly, deliberately, like a cat ready to toy with something smaller. Her smirk was not a smile. It was a barbed hook. She tilted her chin up. "You weren't invited," she said, each word crisp as glass. "So you don't get to look. These are private memories for us. Private memories." My body reacted before my brain did. My knees softened. The way they did the day my husband passed away unexpectedly. I felt a strange icy sensation start at my fingertips and crawl up my arms, settling beneath my collarbones. It was the sensation of blood draining away from my face, leaving me pale, exposed, vibrating with shame. Mark, my son, my only child, he didn't say a word. His eyes dropped to his shoes, those tan loafers I bought him for $112 last Christmas. I watched his gaze fall. Watched him shrink into silence instead of defending me. The silence in the room grew heavy, so heavy it felt like a wet wool blanket thrown over my shoulders. I could barely breathe under its weight. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words evaporated. My throat felt thick, raw. If I had spoken in that moment, I would have crumbled completely. So instead, I straightened my back, clutching my purse strap as though it were a lifeline. My knees shook, but I did not let them bend. "I see," I whispered. Neither of them reacted. Jessica had already returned to scrolling, her laughter filling the space with a cruelty she didn't bother concealing. Mark nodded silently, as if agreeing with something inside his own mind. Without another word, I turned, walked to the door, and let myself out. My hand trembled slightly on the doorknob. I closed it with a soft, controlled click, because even in heartbreak, I remain a woman who does not slam doors. But the moment the latch clicked shut, my heart cracked loud enough for me to hear it. As I drove home that afternoon, my mind kept spiraling back through the last 12 months like a film reel rewinding itself. Frame by frame, receipt by receipt, the highway blurred into streaks of gray as I remembered each financial choice I made in the name of love, and each quiet warning sign I chose to ignore. It had all started so innocently. A year earlier, Mark and Jessica had sat at my dining table, my mahogany table polished weekly with lemon oil, looking small and worried. Jessica dabbed her eyes delicately, saying money was tight. Mark avoided my gaze, the way he does when he wants something but doesn't want to admit it. "Mom, we want to have a wedding, but everything is so expensive," he murmured. Jessica chimed in, "We're thinking a micro-wedding. Super intimate. Your presence is all we want." That sentence, "Your presence is all we want," acted like a warm hand closing around my heart. I remember feeling touched, honored even. I told myself their stress explained their clipped tones, their forgotten thank yous, the way Jessica sometimes talked over me as if I were an employee rather than a future in-law. So, I helped. And I told myself I wanted to. The venue was the first significant expense. Jessica fell in love with Grand Oak Estate, a sprawling manor house with white pillars and a garden that looked like a watercolor painting. She cried, actual tears, when the coordinator told her the deposit was required immediately. I wrote check number 6931 for $8,500 on April 4th. I remember handing over the check with a gentle smile, telling them I wanted their day to be perfect. Jessica hugged me briefly, leaving the faint smell of her perfume, rose and verbena, on my shoulder. Then came the dress. We went to a boutique downtown, where everything looked like it belonged in a glass museum case. Jessica tried on a custom lace gown with hand-sewn pearls, priced at $4,250. When the clerk read the number, Jessica's lips trembled. She whispered, "Maybe I'm not meant to look beautiful at my own wedding." The manipulation hooked me instantly. I stepped forward, placed my hand on hers, and said, "You will look lovely. I'll take care of it." The clerk perked up. "Will you be paying in full today?" "Ma'am." "Less," I said without hesitation. I left the store with my receipt tucked into my purse like a secret promise. Next came the photographer. Jessica insisted on the best in the city. A man named Leo Thorne, whose waiting list stretched for months. He only worked with select clientele. Their problem: Leo required a large upfront payment to secure the date. Platinum package includes 12 hours of coverage, 2 shooters, drone footage, luxury photo album, full RAW file library. Jessica wrung her hands and said, "Mark and I don't have the liquidity right now." Liquidity. That word should have been my warning. It meant they didn't have cash. I signed the contract myself. Wrote Rose M. in large, looping script. Leo shook my hand warmly, telling me I had a good eye for investment. It's funny. He had no idea how right he was. Looking back, the months blurred together. Not because I was busy, but because I was constantly stepping into the role of financier, emotional sponge. I paid for the bridal, shower catering, furnitures 200 pre-wedding spa day, want 540 custom floral centerpieces they never even used, 700 suite alterations for Mark 85 emergency tuxedo replacement when he changed his mind. 3112 every receipt was tucked neatly into a folder labeled Wedding M&J. And still, I convinced myself everything was fine. They were young, stressed, overwhelmed. I told myself their clipped responses weren't disrespect but exhaustion. I told myself the way Jessica sometimes ignored me was just nerves. I said to myself that giving money was love. But 3 days before the wedding, everything changed. Jessica called with a breezy tone, as if she weren't about to tear something sacred from my chest. "Rose, hey! Sue! We just got an update from the venue. Tiny issue. Capacity limits. They said we have to make cuts. You, You won't be able to attend." I remember the exact silence that followed her words. It was long, cold, and jagged. I felt it pierce the center of my being. My hand trembled around the phone. A part of me waited. Wanted Mark to grab the phone. To say it was a mistake, that of course his mother would be there. But he didn't. He didn't even call later. No text. No explanation. Just absence. I cried that night. Quietly, alone in my bedroom. The same room where I had soothed Mark through countless childhood nightmares. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if I could keep my heart from breaking open. But I let them keep the money. Because I didn't want to ruin their day. Because I wanted to get the photos. Because I wanted to believe my son still loved me. And then 2 weeks later, Jessica smirked and said, "You don't get to look." And in that moment, everything, the receipts, the expenses, the sacrifices snapped into sharp, merciless clarity. 8 days passed after the iPad humiliation. 8 long, quiet days where the world seemed to shift into a colder season. Even though spring flowers were blooming outside my window. I spent most mornings in my garden, trimming roses whose leaves had begun to curl from the early heat. My hands have always been steady when tending flowers, but that week, they trembled lightly, as if the memory of Jessica's smirk still lived in my bones. I would kneel beside the soil, feeling its warmth seep into my knees through my linen trousers. The freshly turned earth smelled damp, grounding, and honest. Everything my son's marriage was not. I found myself staring at a particular bush, one I'd planted 20 years ago. Its branches were now mostly rigid sticks, the buds tight and hesitant. A dying rosebush, still pretending to live. Just like me, I thought. On the 8th day, as I clipped away a brittle branch, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my gardening apron. I wiped my hands on my shirt, the faint scent of rosemary and soil clinging to my fingertips, and pulled the phone out. The screen read Mark. My heart immediately tightened, not with love, but with a sorrow I could almost taste. Metallic, like biting on aluminum foil. I let it ring twice, debating whether to answer. Part of me hoped, foolishly, that he was calling to apologize. To say, "Mom, I'm sorry. Jessica was out of line. I miss you. I want you in my life." But when I finally pressed accept, the tone of his voice confirmed the truth I had been resisting for far too long. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't even acknowledge what happened 2 weeks ago. Instead, he rushed in with breathless entitlement. "Mom. Hey, quick thing. The travel agent called. The honeymoon balance is due. Remember, we're leaving for Bora Bora next month. The final payment, $5,400, is due today. Can you transfer it to my account?" For a moment, the world fell silent. The breeze stopped. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I stared at the rosebush, at the one stubborn bud trying to open despite its dying branches. My tongue felt dry. My ears rang faintly, the way they do after a sudden shock. He wasn't calling to mend a wound. He was calling to have my wallet reopened. He didn't even pause to let me answer. "We're kind of short after the reception," he added. The words tumbling out fast, almost accusatory. "You know Jessica and I are trying to build our life. And you always said you'd help us get started." A strange calm washed over me. Icy, clean, sharp. It started at the base of my spine and traveled upward, cooling every hurt place inside me. A cold clarity. When I finally spoke, my voice came out low and steady. I didn't recognize it at first. "Mark," I said, adjusting a wilted leaf on the rosebush. "I only pay for trips where I am invited to see the photos." There was silence, not long, but long enough for him to choke on realization. I continued, "Since I don't get to look at your life, I don't get to pay, or it either." He sputtered, as I expected. "Mom, seriously." Jessica was joking. "She didn't, Jess!" "She didn't mean. You're taking it out of context. We really need this payment, okay? We're depending on you." Depending. The word dropped like a stone into a well. Not appreciating, depending. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't remorseful. He was angry that the ATM had suddenly developed a conscience. "Mark," I said gently, "you already had a wedding without me. You had a photographer without me. And you laughed at the photos without me. Surely you can handle a honeymoon the same way." I didn't wait for his reply. I ended the call mid-protest, the dial tone cutting off his frustrated exhale. I stood, brushing soil from my palms, and felt my breath settle deep into my chest. In that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. They didn't see me. Not as a mother. Not as a person. Just as a balance sheet with a pulse. That day, in my garden full of dying roses, I finally bloomed. 2 days after the call, I drove to Leo Thorne Photography Studio, the building where Jessica had once squealed about timeless luxury and editorial style memories. The studio sat in a renovated warehouse downtown, with exposed brick walls and tall iron-framed windows, a gold plate by the door read LEOHRNE, Steer I Am Moments. The interior smelled of freshly brewed coffee and dark cedar, the kind used in high-end cigar boxes. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. My heels clicked across polished concrete as I stepped inside, and the receptionist, young blonde, with a polite yet distant expression, looked up. "Welcome. Do you have an appointment?" I removed my leather gloves one finger at a time, revealing the emerald ring my late husband had given me for our 40th anniversary. "Tell Leo that Rose has come," I said evenly. "He'll know which one." There was a flicker of recognition, or perhaps curiosity, in her eyes before she disappeared through a back door. Moments later, Leo emerged tall and slightly disheveled in the artistic way that suggests brilliance rather than carelessness. When he saw me, his face warmed instantly. "Mrs. Rose," he exclaimed, striding forward. "It has been a while. You look radiant." His voice was genuine, soft with familiarity. I allowed a small smile. "Hello, Leo. I hope business is well." He led me into his private editing suite, lined with screens displaying wedding galleries. Candles flickered on a side table. The room felt more like a lounge than an office. "Have the newlyweds shown you the album yet?" Leo asked as he settled into a leather chair. "It's quite stunning." The question sliced deep. "But pain is easier to bear when you've already decided what comes next." "No," I said. "They have not shown me a single image." Leo frowned. "That's odd." Jessica was adamant that. I raised a hand gently. "Leo, before we continue, I'd like to pull out the contract. The one I signed." His eyebrows lifted slightly as I removed a folder from my handbag. Brown leather, edges sharp and precise. Inside was the contract, printed on linen paper with embossed text. My signature sat at the bottom in black ink, looping and elegant. I slid it across the table, tapping a finger on the relevant section. "Clause 4, I said. "Section B." Leo's eyes scanned the paragraph, and slowly, his expression shifted. From confusion to surprise to something like admiration, he read aloud, "The client payer retains sole copyright and distribution rights of all digital assets until formally released to the subjects." He leaned back, exhaling a low whistle. "So the couple has no rights to these photos whatsoever?" "Not legally, correct." My voice was soft steel. "I am the client. I signed the check. My name is on every line item." Leo looked almost relieved, as if he had long sensed something off about Mark and Jessica. "What would you like to do, Mrs. Rose?" he asked quietly. I reached into my handbag again and placed a black, velvet-lined hard drive on the table. It gleamed beneath the warm studio lights like an artifact. "I would like every RAW file," I said. "Every JPEG. Every drone clip. Every unedited rehearsal shot. And I would like them removed from your cloud storage immediately." Leo blinked. "Yes," I replied. "All of them." He hesitated. "Mrs. Rosie, this means the couple won't have access to their gallery." I held his gaze, letting him see. Not anger, not vengeance, but the chilled clarity of a woman who has finally had enough. Jessica told me, I said slowly, that I wasn't invited to look at the photos. Leo's face twisted with disgust. She said that to you. She did. So I am enforcing my rights as the person who paid $6,800 for those images. Leo nodded with solemn respect. As you wish. He took the hard drive with both hands, as if accepting a sacred duty. As he plugged it into his system, the soft hum of the transfer began filling the room. The tiny progress bar crept forward, and with it, a peculiar sensation settled in my chest: excitement, vindication. No, something steadier, something clean, control. I watched the files populate the drive one by one. Tiny thumbnails of a wedding I never attended. A wedding I financed. A wedding they tried to erase me from. Click, click, click. Thousands of images transferred. And with everyone, I felt less invisible. When Leo finally ejected the drive and placed it gently in my hands, the weight surprised me. It felt heavier than gold, denser than truth. It felt like ownership. Mrs. Rose, he said quietly. For what it's worth, they don't deserve you. I breathed in slowly, letting the air fill me, expand me. No, I replied. They don't. And with that, I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, the hard drive tucked securely in my bag, a quiet, potent reminder. If they would not let me be part of the memory, I would become the keeper of memory. 3 days passed after I retrieved the wedding files. And in those 3 days, I experienced a silence unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't peaceful silence. It wasn't healing silence. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, but still carries the faint scent of lightning. Charged, waiting, expectant. I knew they would realize something was wrong. I knew they would lash out. I just didn't know how quickly or how violently the entitled unraveling would begin. On the morning of the 3rd day, I woke to a strange sensation that the air in my home felt tighter. My grandmother used to say she could smell trouble before it knocked. I suppose her blood runs in me. Because when I stepped into my kitchen and poured myself a cup of Sumatran coffee, the scent, normally warm and earthy, tasted like ash on my tongue. A warning. At exactly 9:12 m, my phone buzzed. Jessica, I didn't answer. Not out of pettiness. Out of preservation. Some voices simply corrode the spirit. Instead, I sat at my breakfast table, letting the steam from the mug warm my palms. And then, I heard something I should not have heard. My front door is opening. Not knocking. Not ringing the bell. Opening. My heart lurched. I felt a cold shock shoot up my spine, like stepping into a winter lake. I rose quietly, setting my mug down with slow precision. My fingers trembled, but my mind sharpened, cold, alert. When I stepped into the living room, they were already inside. Jessica, wild-eyed, her cheeks blotchy, hair frizzed with panic. Mark, sweaty, red-faced, fists clenched. And there, clutched in Jessica's hands, were my keys. The emergency keys I had given them 3 years ago, back when trust meant something. Where are they? Jessica screamed before she even saw me. Where are the photos, Rose? Where is the hard drive? You stole them. You're insane. You're a criminal. Her voice was shrill enough to rattle the chandelier. Mark whirled toward me, pointing a shaking finger. Mom, this is Isla jail, he shouted. Jessica said, Leo locked our gallery. He said, yeah, you revoked access. You can't do that. You can't just take our wedding photos. The audacity washed over me like heat from an open oven. They had stolen a wedding from me. They had stolen a moment I deserved. And now they were accusing me of theft. I inhaled slowly, letting the air fill my chest. My pulse steadied. My voice, when I spoke, came out soft, too soft. The kind of softness that scares people more than yelling ever could. You used my keys, I said, to break into my home. Jessica scoffed, waving a manicured hand. Oh my God, Rose, don't be dramatic. You're withholding our property. That's a crime. I'm calling the police. Right now. She reached into her purse, but Mark grabbed her wrist.
What?
He hissed. Let me talk to her. He approached me, lowering his voice but not his arrogance. Mum, listen. You're upset. We get it. Weddings are emotional. But you have to give us the photos. Those are memories. They are files. I corrected, from a service I paid for. His face flushed crimson. Mom, please. Give us the drive. Give us the files. Jessica needs them for social media. Her friends are waiting for the pictures. People are asking. We look stupid. I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief. For them, a marriage was not a commitment. It was content. Jessica suddenly shoved past Mark and got in my face. I could smell peppermint gum and desperation. If you don't hand over the hard drive, she snarled, we will sue you for emotional distress. Theft. Malicious intent. Whatever it takes. Mark nodded like a bobblehead. We already talked to a lawyer. He said we can force you to hand it over since we're the subjects in the photos. You have no rights. That was when I stepped backward, gliding toward the fireplace with deliberate calm. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my phone. Perfect timing, I murmured. I already expected you, I said. So I called my lawyer. And with a slow, practiced movement, I put Mr. Weber on speaker. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Rose, is everything all right? Jessica let out a hysterical laugh. Everything is not all right. Mr. Weber's voice cut through her, shrieking like a scalpel. Mom, calm yourself. Legally speaking, my client, Mrs. Rose, is the sole owner of those photographs. The contract is explicitly clear. Mark stepped forward. She can't do this, Mr. Weber replied. She not only can, she already has. A pause. And you two are currently trespassing. Jessica's jaw fell open. Mark froze. And in that stillness, like the calm at the center of a hurricane, I realized something profound. Their love for me was conditional. Their entitlement was not. My home had never felt safer than it did while Mr. Weber's voice filled the room. Mrs. Rose, he said calmly, please escort them out. If they refuse, I will send the authorities. Shall I? Jessica looked horrified. Mark looked cornered. And I felt powerful for the first time in years. You both need to leave, I said quietly. Now. The fear on their faces was the first honest emotion I had seen from them in a long, long time. The next morning, I drove to Mr. Weber's office, an elegant brick building with ivy climbing its columns and a brass plaque that read BBR and Associates, Elder and Estate Law. I stepped inside, the cool air smelling faintly of lemon polish and old leather books. The receptionist greeted me like an old friend and ushered me to Mr. Weber's office immediately. He stood from behind his mahogany desk, extending a hand. Mrs. Rose, I assume yesterday was eventful. His eyes twinkled with a mixture of pity and admiration. I sat down, smoothing the hem of my cream wool coat. They barged into my home, I said. Jessica screamed. Mark threatened lawsuits. He nodded. Good. This confirms exactly what I suspected. He retrieved the photography contract from my folder and placed it between us on a felt mat. His fingers tapped the relevant clause. Clause 4, Section B. He recited. The copyright holder is the payer. Legally indisputable. They have no rights to the files, the gallery, or the distribution. I felt my shoulders loosen. My breath deepened. Someone was on my side. Someone understood. Now, Mr. Weber continued, if they want the rights, they can purchase them. I raised an eyebrow. Purchase? Yes, he said with a smile. For the full reimbursement of all wedding-related expenses. He pulled out a legal pad and uncapped a fountain pen. Let's total it, he said, and then with slow, deliberate strokes he wrote Grand Oak Estate Deposit, 8,500 dress and 4,250 photographer. 801,200 spy day, ein 540 floral centerpieces, 7 alterations and replacement 397 apartment rent partial year, 400 and miscellaneous transfers to 250. He drew a line beneath the list, then wrote the total, 51,837. My eyes lingered on the number. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the truth behind it. I whispered, "That is the price of my love." Mr. Weber shook his head gently. "No, Mrs. Rose. That is the price of their entitlement. Not your love." The words loosened something tight inside me. Something coiled and clenched for too long. "We will draft a cease," he continued. "If they want the photos, they must buy them for exactly 51,837. If they harass you again." I exhaled. "Thank you." When I left his office, the world looked strangely different. Brighter, sharper, more solid, as if my actions had shifted the axis under my feet. I stopped at my favorite tea shop on the way home, ordering Earl Grey with lavender, and carried it in a porcelain cup to my porch, where I found Eleanor, my neighbor, already waiting. She held a small wicker basket filled with scones and wore a knitted shawl patterned with violets. She smiled warmly. "Thought you might need company, dear." We sat together under the oak tree, the wind rustling its leaves like soft applause. "I feel like I've turned a corner," I said quietly. "But the guilt still stings." Eleanor patted my hand. Her palms were warm, steady. "Rose, my husband used to say something wise," he said. "People who take advantage of your kindness will always accuse you of cruelty the moment you stop." I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, but from recognition. "You aren't stealing their memories," Eleanor continued. "You're just keeping what you paid for. They made the rules. You're finally playing by them." The words wrapped around me like a gentle blanket. For years, I had been alone in my generosity. Now I was no longer alone in my awakening. Mr. Weber, Leo, Eleanor. People who treated me better than my own blood. I leaned back, letting the warm sun touch my face, and felt a shift deep in my chest. A blooming, a reclaiming. I was no longer simply a mother. I was a woman rebuilding her power. There is a particular heaviness that comes with waiting for a storm you already know is headed your way. For 3 days after drafting the cease and desist letter, my house felt unnervingly calm. I kept the curtains cracked just enough to watch the driveway, expecting a knock, or a ringing phone, or some desperate, frantic message. But nothing came, not at first. Instead, the air remained still, thick with anticipation. My morning tea tasted metallic, as if the universe was warning me. Even the clock on my mantel ticked with sharper clicks, each one like a countdown. I'd lived my entire life navigating emotional storms, being a single mother, balancing grief and responsibility. But this one felt different. This one was coming from the two people I had loved more fiercely than my own breath. On the 4th day, around 2 in the afternoon, as I was serving lemon tea to 2 friends from my charity board, I saw movement on my front cameras. I glanced down at my phone and watched as a familiar car pulled up. Mark's silver sedan. Then another, Jessica's electric blue SUV. And then a third, black and official looking. Jessica stepped out first, dressed in a violet blouse that clashed with her red, swollen eyes. Behind her, Mark stumbled out, looking disheveled, unshaven, and angry. But it was the third person who made the air disappear from my lungs. A police officer stepping out of the cruiser with a notepad in hand. My friends went silent mid-sip. I could feel the temperature in my living room drop. Not physically, but emotionally, the way a room feels right before terrible news is delivered. "Here it is," I murmured to myself. The storm. My friends exchanged glances, unsure whether to leave or stay. I shook my head gently. No. Stay. If they wanted this to be public, then public they shall have. The officer approached my door, followed closely by Mark and Jessica. I opened it before the knock, standing tall, my posture straight, my silk blouse freshly pressed. My pearl earrings glimmered softly. A gift from my late husband, who always said pearls gave a woman the strength to speak truth. The officer nodded politely. Ma'am, we received a report that you're withholding stolen property belonging to your son and daughter. In law. Jessica shoved past him, pointing at me with trembling fingers. She stole our wedding photos! She took them! She is senile and vindictive! She needs to be stopped. Her voice cracked into a sob, but I recognized the sound. Not grief. Panic. Mark stepped forward, flustered. Mom, please just hand over the hard drive. This has gone far enough. You have no legal right to keep those photos. The two friends inside my living room, both well-dressed, elegant women in their 60s, watched with wide eyes, their teacups frozen mid-air. I inhaled slowly, the scent of jasmine tea lingering at the back of my throat. Then I reached for the folder I had placed neatly on the console table that morning, knowing this moment would come. Officer, I said calmly, they are mistaken. These items are not stolen. They belong to me. Legally. He raised an eyebrow. Can you provide documentation? I handed him the photography contract, signed by me, sealed by the studio, and highlighted by Mr. Weber himself. The officer took his time reading it, scanning each line with care. The silence was suffocating, like a velvet curtain drawn too tightly around a stage. Mark fidgeted nervously. Jessica paced like a frantic animal. My friends exchanged murmurs. After several long minutes, the officer finally closed the folder. He turned not to me, but to Jessica. Mom, he said carefully, according to this contract, Mrs. Rose is the sole copyright holder of the photographs. Only she has distribution rights. She has done nothing illegal. Jessica's face drained fast. I thought she might faint. No, that's impossible. She stole our memories. She's doing this on purpose. She hates me. The officer shook his head. Legally, the images are her property. You're actually trespassing at this point. The words struck Jessica like a slap. She gasped, a high, strangled sound. Mark looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. Mom, please, we need those photos. Jessica can't post anything online. People think we didn't even achieve a wedding. Ah, there it was. Not love, not remorse. Reputation. I let the silence linger, thick and heavy. Then, I stepped forward into the sunlight spilling through the doorway, and in a controlled, steady voice that echoed across the porch I spoke. I paid $600 for those photographs. I said, looking directly into Jessica's frantic eyes. I paid $8,500 for the venue. $4,050 for your dress. First $200 for your shower. For your spa day. The $26,400 in your rent, Mark, all for a wedding I was uninvited from. My voice didn't shake. But Jessica did. I continued. Louder now. Loud enough for the officer, my friends, the passing jogger, and perhaps even the sky to hear. You told me I wasn't invited to look at the photos. And now, legally, you are not invited to own them. Jessica burst into hysterical sobs, collapsing against the railing like a wilted vine. Mark's hands shook uncontrollably. His lips parted and closed like a fish gasping for air. The officer stepped aside. Mum, he told them firmly, you need to leave now. Any further attempts to take property that is not legally yours could turn into criminal charges. Jessica screamed. A raw, ugly sound, before bolting for her car. Mark lingered, staring at me with a wounded expression that made my throat tighten despite everything. Mum, why are you doing this? He whispered. Not in tenderness, but accusation. I swallowed the ache in my chest and spoke softly. I'm not doing this to you, Mark. I'm doing this for myself. I cannot keep funding a life that does not include me. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to understand a language he had never bothered to learn. The officer stepped between us. Sir, you need to leave. Mark finally turned away, shoulders slumped, and followed Jessica to the car. And just like that, the storm passed. My friends rushed to my side, embracing me with arms warm and human. One whispered, "Rosa, that was extraordinary." Another whispered, "You saved yourself today." But I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt free, and terrified, and relieved, and heartbreakingly awake. The days after the confrontation were strangely quiet, as if my world had fallen into a softer rhythm. One without the constant buzzing of demands, expectations, or emotional manipulation. I slept deeply for the first time in years, without waking at dawn to anxiety clawing at my chest. My coffee tasted rich again. My roses bloomed brighter, lush and red, as if applauding me in their silent floral language. Mark and Jessica disappeared into silence. Not the kind they used as a weapon, but the kind born of humiliation and consequence. I later learned, through the subtle grapevine of mutual acquaintances, that without the photographs, Jessica's meticulously curated online persona fell apart. There were no images to post, no proof of the wedding she had meticulously crafted for social media validation. Her friends asked questions she couldn't answer. Her face reportedly flushed with shame every time someone asked, "Where are the pictures?" A wedding without photos. A celebration with no recorded joy. It was like a movie screened in an empty theater. Their marriage began to crack beneath the weight of lost memories, arguments, tension, resentments. Mark's job hours were cut. Jessica's influencer ambitions flatlined. Their rent increased by $150. Bills piled up. Consequences, I reminded myself, are not cruelty. They are teachers. Meanwhile, I began to live. The $5,400 I had refused to pay for their honeymoon sat untouched in my account. And one morning, as sunlight spilled across my living room floor like a golden carpet, I made a decision. A small one, but mine. I booked a solo trip to Italy. Not the budget kind. Not the hurried, tourist kind. The kind where you wake in a suite overlooking the Amalfi Coast. Where the waves lick the rocks like silver, blue silk. Where breakfast is brought on a tray. Croissants with lemon curd, honey drizzled over warm figs, cappuccino dusted with cocoa. I hired a photographer in Positano, Matteo. A quiet young man with a tender eye for beauty. When he positioned his camera, he said softly, "Signora, you have the expression of a woman who has lived through storms and learned how to sit with the sun again." I smiled. For the first real photograph taken of me in years. I wore a flowing linen dress the color of ivory seashells. I lifted my chin, let the Mediterranean wind pull back my silver hair, and allowed myself to feel alive, truly alive, without guilt. On my last night, sitting at a seaside restaurant with a glass of Prosecco, watching the sky melt into shades of tangerine and rose, I made my final decision. When I returned home, I unlocked my safe, took out the hard drive containing every raw photo from Mark and Jessica's wedding, and deleted all of it. Not out of malice, not out of revenge, but because I no longer wanted to hold on to memories that never included me. I wanted a clean slate. My own horizon, my own life. That night, as the hard drive gave its final confirmation beep, I whispered to myself, "Memories are made by the people who show up, not the people who pay." And from that moment on, I vowed to invest only in those who saw me, not as a wallet, not as a convenience, but as a woman, a mother, a soul deserving of love. And for the first time in decades, the world felt wide and golden and beautifully, beautifully mine.